Chicago, 1981. The city is already haunted by the ghosts of its past. Al Capone, the stockyards, and the monstrous legacy of John Wayne Gacy. But in the shadows, something far darker was emerging. A secret cult of killers, hunting the streets in their unmarked van. Their prey, young women. Their ritual, one of the most unspeakable horrors ever recorded in American crime. But these weren't just killers. They were butchers, worshippers of pain, practitioners of black magic who believed that suffering and bloodshed would grant them power beyond human understanding. They called themselves the Chicago Ripper Crew, but they were something worse than a simple gang of killers. They were practitioners of the blackest arts, and were still. Some say their influence never truly died. Tonight, we step into the twisted abyss of the Chicago Ripper Crew, a tale of blood, ritual, and unspeakable depravity. You will not emerge from this one unscathed.
Chicago, Illinois, a city built on crime, industry, and the unrelenting pulse of its streets. But between 1981 and 1982, a different kind of darkness took hold. Women, young, alone, and unaware, were plucked from the streets, dragged into the dark, and never seen alive again. Their bodies, when found, told stories of agony beyond imagination. Forensic experts noted the gruesome signatures left behind by the killers. Victims were found mutilated, carved, tortured, and defiled. Some had their breasts removed with surgical precision, taken as offerings to a nameless entity. Others were kept alive for days, subjected to ritualistic abuse, before being slaughtered. Their flesh was consumed. Their suffering was worshipped. Some victims were never found at all. Some were simply erased. The police, overwhelmed and baffled, had no clear suspects. And as the city of Chicago held its breath, the nightmare only deepened. The Ripper Crew consisted of 4 men, each more disturbed than the last. Robin Gecht, the mastermind. A construction subcontractor by trade, Gecht appeared normal. To the outside world, he was a hard worker, a father, a man of faith. But beneath the surface, he was a predator of the highest order. Gecht had worked under John Wayne Gacy, one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. Some believe it was during this time that he developed a taste for blood. Unlike Gacy, who saw murder as an act of personal pleasure, Gecht saw it as an offering, a sacrifice, a gateway to something far darker. Gecht was obsessed with the occult. He filled his small apartment with books on black magic, necromancy, and sacrifice. But his greatest influence came from the writings of Aleister Crowley, particularly the twisted interpretations of Thelema. Gecht's belief that through ritualistic suffering, he could ascend beyond human limitations. Gecht had been a construction worker, using his charm to attract younger men into his circle. However, beneath his normal exterior lurked something much darker. Edward Spreitzer, the executioner. Spreitzer was Gecht's right hand. If Gecht was the mind, Spreitzer was the blade. He was a willing killer, eager to prove himself, eager to indulge in the carnage. It was Spreitzer who was most often tasked with carrying out the unspeakable acts. Andrew and Thomas Kokorolais, the devotees. The 2 brothers, raised in strict religious households, were seduced by the promise of forbidden power. They were desperate for acceptance, eager to prove their worth in Gecht's sick rituals. But in the end, they were merely pawns, expendable tools in Gecht's grand design. The killings followed a distinct and horrifying pattern, but at their core was something more sinister than random acts of violence. Gecht had created a belief system rooted in distorted occultism, an unholy combination of sadistic pleasure and supposed spiritual enlightenment. He claimed the killings were necessary for power, ritualistic sacrifices to unseen forces that granted strength to those who proved their devotion. Gecht was reportedly fascinated by ancient rituals and texts associated with dark magic. Investigators believed he had been influenced by esoteric teachings from groups that dabbled in black magic, though no direct connections were ever confirmed. Some speculated that his ideas were a perverse interpretation of Thelema, a spiritual philosophy founded by Aleister Crowley that emphasized the pursuit of one's true will, twisted by Gecht into something monstrous. His followers, impressionable and eager to please, fell into his web of manipulation. They truly believed that consuming the flesh of their victims would imbue them with supernatural abilities, making them stronger, more powerful, and untouchable. This belief was drawn from a combination of ancient cannibalistic rituals and Gecht's own fabrications. The ritual itself was gruesome. Victims were brought to a makeshift altar, often Gecht's dingy apartment, where the mutilations would begin. The removal of the breasts was believed to be a form of sacrifice, offered to an unnamed dark force that Gecht claimed spoke to him. The flesh was consumed in ritualistic fashion, sometimes in complete silence, sometimes accompanied by chanting. For Gecht, this was more than murder, it was worship. The Ripper crew was not just killing to satisfy their sadism. They believed they were serving something greater, and in their minds, the darkness was watching, rewarding them for their obedience. The Ripper crew's rituals were worse than murder. Their victims weren't just killed, they were subjected to horrors few could comprehend. Cannibalism. After the victims were mutilated, their flesh was eaten. The men believed consuming the body granted them power. Necrophilia. Several victims were sexually assaulted post-mortem. To Gecht, death was not the end of his worship. Human sacrifices. Some victims were forced to endure days of suffering before being slaughtered. One of their most infamous victims was 18-year-old Lorraine Borowski, a secretary who was abducted on her way to work. Her body was later discovered in a cemetery, her remains defiled beyond recognition. She was not their first victim, and she would not be their last. When the Ripper crew was finally caught in 1982, many breathed a sigh of relief, but the investigation was far from over. Some victims were never identified. Witnesses claimed other men were involved, but were never arrested. Rumors spread that the cult had expanded beyond Chicago, and then there was Gecht himself. Despite his horrific crimes, Gecht was never convicted of murder. Instead, he was sentenced to 120 years for aggravated sexual assault. Was this justice, or was there something darker at play? Even decades after the Ripper crew's reign of terror, echoes of their influence remain. Copycat killers. Similar crimes appeared in Illinois, Indiana, and beyond. The dark web. Modern forms discuss ritual sacrifice, blood magic, and the consumption of flesh. Unsolved murders. Cases eerily similar to the Ripper crew's methods continue to surface. Some say Gecht's influence still reaches beyond prison walls. Some say the rituals continue, and some say, if you listen closely in the dead of night, you can still hear the van doors sliding open.
The City of Wind, deep dish pizza, and, oh yeah, Ritualistic slaughter. They say the Ripper crew is gone, that the streets are safe, that the van doors have rusted shut. But isn't it funny, mortals? Bodies are still going missing, people still vanish without trace, and the darkness they worshipped, well, it never left. Perhaps you're walking home late one night. The streetlights flicker, the air grows heavy, and then a van rolls up beside you. A door slides open, and you feel a hand clamp over your mouth. Will anyone hear you scream?